Abe here, and I wanted to let you know that if you're able, you can upgrade your small beans skill over at patreon.com/smallbeans. Here's why you should do that. If you pledge 5 measly beans a month, you get access to about half our podcasts that you don't get if you're just listening to the free feed. Shows include Star Trek The Next Futurama, Spiel Boys, Like Razor Blade Pie, and bonus episodes of I'll Show You Mine If You Show Me Yours. Not to mention bonus content including info and updates on the movie we're making, Papa Bear. Hey, where's all the reasons to not subscribe to Patreon? I can't find them. Anyway, back to the show.
What was I singing before?
I don't know. What was I saying? We never have intros. Like, some people write their intros, and it's fascinating to me that you and I write down these podcasts. We're like, let's do a really good job with this. Let's write out arguments and stuff. But when it comes to intros, it's like, I don't know. Just whip out your dick and do something with it. Like, whatever you need, man. Just go for it.
Bum, 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 bum. Mr. Saltburn, bum, bum, bum.
Wow.
Kill my family, dun, 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 dun. It's just that, like, the talented Mr. Ripley, bum, 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 bum. I actually don't have any more than that.
We spent 30 seconds thinking of an intro, and that's what you came up with.
Yeah,
Wow.
I didn't care.
Wow.
That was the problem. That my heart wasn't in it.
Yeah.
It's also, it shows that I would be a terrible Oliver Quick or talented Mr. Ripley. I'm not very talented.
Being untalented, Mr. Ripley.
Yeah. So here we are. Hopefully that gave you a chuckle at my expense.
Hopefully.
This is Directorpiece Theater.
Yeah,
We've
it is.
been on a hiatus for a bit, but hey, guess what? We're back and we're doing movies. We're talking about the directors of movies and what they do.
It was too long of a hiatus. I just missed your face verbally.
Yeah.
Mr. Sound
he said
Face.
my name. I'm Abe. That's Adam over there.
Mm-hmm.
And he brought us a theory today about the movie Saltburn, which came out last year? Like this year?
Yeah. About it's a 2023 movie, so last
23,
year.
yeah.
It was some people's pick for best movie of the year, I kept hearing. And like I became the exact age I am immediately by rolling my eyes when I heard that. It's like, get the hell out of here.
Yeah, you're getting old man syndrome.
I am. This movie immediately invoked old man syndrome. Although what's hilarious about it to me is, it's from around my era. Like, it takes place in 2005.
Yeah, they're speaking to the songs of your people.
Dude, all I wanted to do was talk about the soundtrack. I was like, oh yeah, this is all college rock. I know all this. But
I heard Block Party, and I was like, that was me in college.
MGMT made an appearance. I was like, oh my God, I remember that band.
Yep.
Yeah. The Killers record, the first Killers record, I remember that one. Hey, it was great.
Yeah, what a time.
What a time to have sounds hit your ears. What a wonderful time. Hey, Abe, thank God for Creeps. Right?
Yeah, hey, I love Creeps. I love
God.
this. As soon as I saw who everyone was, like the family and everything, like basically like 20 minutes in the movie, I was like, oh, I hope he fucks and kills everybody.
I hope that's what I'm going to get, and boy, did you get it.
And, they did not disappoint, dude.
No, they didn't.
Didn't disappoint.
They really didn't.
I could have seen some more sultry,
It could have gotten sexier in your mind?
It's pretty sexy. The movie's pretty sexy.
I agree with that. I also disagree with it. I have a lot of feelings about the movie. I think everybody does about 2023.
Everyone's on a
Saltburn.
spectrum, and this is right on. For me, this is right where I'm at.
Oh, this is the Abe picture.
Yeah, this is how I want sex to happen.
Great. Did you see Poor Things?
I haven't seen Poor Things
Okay,
yet.
you need to see that because I want to have that. I want to have this exact conversation with you again when you've seen Poor Things. Because that's another one, man. That's another fucking movie.
All right, yeah.
A lot of creeps in that movie. Anyway, thank God for Creeps, as I was saying.
Yes.
So many of our best movies are just slowly pulling the mask down on a creep these days.
Yeah, like
right?
the sensational film with Jim Carrey, The Mask. You like that joke?
What I like is how you shoehorn the mask in every place it doesn't belong. It's my favorite.
I wouldn't say it doesn't belong, but keep doing it. I don't want to stop you. You're vibing.
In fact, you are saying that right now. Anyway, so many movies are about creeps. Movies like The Joker, or like movies like all the other movies, which are mostly Batman movies, as I understand it. Yeah. Everything is Joker, right? The Joker is
everyone's
the
just
mascot
freaks in that universe.
Film. Yeah.
But we love a freak. We love someone who's very kind of sad and pitiful, but also dangerous.
Yes. Actually, so like the phenomenon of like the rise of creeps in movies is interesting as a sociological experiment, because like you can see that a lot of our entertainment has slowly been sort of drifting toward exploring creeps. Like, for instance, everyone's griping about the true crime revolution, right? But also most of prestige television has been slowly finding ways to make the person who was obviously the bad guy in a movie in like anywhere from the 60s to the 90s into the protagonist. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that's just become the move now.
We have a big sympathy for the devil thing, because I think 100%. It comes from like contrarian Hollywood, where it's like, it's not all Hollywood. It's not like Disney, but it's a lot of alternative cinema and independent cinema is like, I don't want to do the traditional 4-quadrant story. So they're gonna think of what's the hardest I can go, and the answer to that is like kind of an anti-hero or a straight up villain that's repurposed.
And it's an interesting problem, like, because at a certain point, if you've left 4-quadrant movies as hard as we have, those become the anti-movie in a way.
Yeah,
like, you know what I mean? Like, I really think you'll see in like 10, 15 years, depending on how culture survives, like you'll see people pivoting back to that because it'll become interesting again, right? Like, these are yin and yang things in some ways. But like making a movie about a creep presents a really interesting dilemma for a director, because on the one hand, you must make us empathize with the creep to have him or her be a protagonist, right? So like getting us to empathize is a huge piece of the exercise for a director. But you also have this opposing mandate, because of the premise of walking us down the road toward grave humping our good intentions. You know what I mean? You got to find a way for us to be repulsed but also intrigued by the creep. And this is not a brand new genre at all, but there's been a lot of very notable entries in it that I'll just kind of list so that we understand exactly what kind of movie we're talking about. So like the most obvious of them is A Talented Mr. Ripley, which we'll be referring to a bunch, but there's been movies like Joker, Nightcrawler, Gone Girl, A Simple Favor, American Psycho is a move toward this. Obviously Taxi Driver is sort of a great granddaddy of this genre, and Misery.
Oh yeah, Misery.
That movie's underrated. That's a great fucking movie.
It's fantastic. Rob Reiner killing it, man.
Yeah, Rob Reiner made that. Yeah, I know.
And he had like a series of like bangers in a row.
That was after When Harry Met Sally. Then he made Misery.
He had like a 4-string movie that just like, oh wow, those are all home runs, immediate classics. What the fuck?
Yeah, I mean, we have talked about him on this podcast, as I recall.
Yeah, we've also talked about it on the Stephen King podcast a ton.
Makes sense. Yeah, because of Stand By Me, right, which is a great film.
And Misery,
yeah, Misery, and then anyway, A Few Good Men. We could go on and on. The point is, Saltburn is the most recent in this spectrum of creep movies, and it's by Emerald Fennell, who is now sort of infamous for the movie Promising Young Woman, which she won an Oscar for as a writer for her screenplay.
Yeah.
Promising Young Woman remains a divisive film. I loved it, and I know a lot of people loved it, but last night I was literally over hanging out with a bunch of younger women watching a different film, American Fiction, and they all hated Promising Young Woman and had very complex arguments about it. So something about Emerald Fennell's filmography is definitely pushing people toward the edge of what they find comfortable. That's who she is. That's her sensibility, which I think is really cool. the creep of this film, Saltburn, is Oliver Quick, as Abe mentioned, and he's played incredibly by Barry Keoghan, who's quickly becoming one of my favorite actors.
He was in the Banshees of Inisherin as
he was
one of the best supporting roles. Where he's just like, "Oh, you don't love me? All right, well, fuck." Like, just a sad man, just a sad character.
He's awesome. He's not accidentally, by the way, going to play the Joker in the newest Batman franchise.
Saltburn is proof that he has both of the combination of like, oh, that's just a dude who's just like kind of a harmless dude. He just seems like a small guy who's not going to harm anyone.
Seems
and then
innocuous.
Also like he just turns on a switch and you're like, that motherfucker's a school shooter, man. Like that's
like there was a little
much.
while where Steve Buscemi was this type of person. Mm-hmm. Before he became, I think, before his limitations started to become more obvious to us. Yeah. Like he could sort of fit anywhere. And, often played these kind of creeps. Barry Keoghan rules. I love him. I think he's a great actor. So he presents a lot of material to work with. But today's episode is fundamentally asking the question, how do our newest and brightest filmmakers present the creep to us in a way that is compelling, that it communicates both the intimacy that we need to care for this character, but also show us that he is indeed a full-fledged creep. This dual purpose we will be calling, for the purpose of this episode, pulling a Ripley. Mm-hmm, How do you pull a Ripley?
Yeah.
Yeah, so Abe, as always, stop me anytime if there are any observations you want to add in here.
You got it, man.
Yeah.
Let's go.
Yeah, bro. So, the question, how do we create emotional intimacy with a character we're supposed to feel repulsed by? So, I want to start with, the most obvious thing, because it's the thing that we often overlook, right? And that is, casting is always is 95% of the work when you're casting a creep, right? Like, if you don't get the right actor, you don't have it, and it's not possible no matter what you do. From a filmmaking point of view, there's nothing that substitutes for that. Part of the strange chemistry or alchemy of this is kind of understanding the given value that a person has as an actor and knowing how to channel that correctly.
Right.
And this is an uncomfortable thing, but it's 100% what casting is about. Like, when you're auditioning actors, you get a distinct vibe from them that may not even be who they are necessarily, but it's what they communicate, in your primal lizard brain. And casting a creep means, seeing the potential for this sort of latent, sometimes violent, often, manipulative, sort of, Iago-ish quality that exists in all these kinds of people. And it's a bummer thing to be an actor who's great at that, except for the fact that you'll work forever. That's the only consolation. You mentioned Iago. It's known as one of the greatest roles of all time for a very specific reason. It's very, very complex, and it's fascinating, and it's, compelling in a way that we're like, oh, it's blending evil and want and desire and greed and all, or envy, and it's all these things, and it's different from a Superman who's just like, I'm good. I'm very good. Not everybody can play Superman because not everybody can play a creep. And you'll find that if you look really carefully at most actors' filmography, of course there are exceptions, but most actors fit kind of neatly into certain genres and story types because the way they are matches this kind of feeling that the story encapsulates.
So much of acting is, hey, what kind of type do you look like?
Yes.
It's
directing too.
There's no way around it. We say that we're like, we want to break types and stuff like that. But when you're a director or a showrunner of a TV show or something, and you're looking at people, you're like, look, I just want it to be clear first. I'm not to this place where I can get elegant. And sometimes the character is not something that you're like, I can't spend time getting the audience to the complexity of how I wish I would show it. So yeah, I'm going to just show this guy as a piece of shit, and he looks like a piece of shit. There's no way around
you need
this.
That shorthand. Otherwise, here's 20 minutes of film that needs to be cut.
Right, exactly.
Right? We're all relying on stereotypes and prejudices to make sense of the world. It's a dark thing that we're often confronting now culturally, and that's a good thing. but also is still necessary for storytelling. What is it that makes someone have a vibe? Like the alchemy of that boils down to, in my opinion, like the way their face hits you.
Yeah.
A little bit of like what are their manners and personality, and then a third quality that's not as easy to define, which I would say is like, what is the narrative that surrounds them? Some of that is like, are there stories that shape how we feel about them? And some of it is just sort of like, what is the collective reaction to this person? It's like
what have they done in the past, and how is that a zeitgeist building?
And sometimes those things tend to sort of converge. Like, for instance, Russell Crowe, the role that really he broke out in was Bud White in LA Confidential.
Great example, yeah.
Yeah, and like it was like, man, he was born to play that role. And then we sort of like, maybe he's actually a hero. Maybe he's Gladiator, in fact. And then as the years have gone on, it's like, no, Bud White actually was a perfect role for him.
Because he's kind of a heavy. He's a bruiser,
Yes.
And he's also a good actor. He's done some good stuff.
Yes.
He's got a very aggressive face, I've always thought.
And he's got a little bit of
in your face.
Needs to prove it. He's got something to prove. That's just like in his energy, and Bud White has more of that than, Maximus does.
Right. Yeah.
So I'm not saying he was bad as Maximus. I'm just saying, like, a lot of getting a great performance is also getting the vibe of this person and how do they fit. Right. So that brings us to Barry Keoghan. So Barry Keoghan, I think, has been like, Hollywood has a great dossier on him because he keeps getting put in these roles and he's incredible in them, right?
Right. He's choosing really good roles.
Yeah, maybe it's that he's choosing them. Or maybe it's that, people. It's probably a confluence of things. Banshees of Inisherin, he absolutely demolishes in that movie and rips your heart up. As like sort of, he's so unaware in a way that you're like, how does he do that? And this role bizarrely is exactly the opposite of that, and yet they feel like they're kindred spirits. Right?
Yeah, because he's the self-loathing.
Right.
It's the internalized
self-loathing,
insecurity, and kind of skittish behavior. Kind of like a prey animal type.
Right.
I imagine him as a little rat running around if, he didn't have control. And one character has control, the other is, just running around. He's not really in control of anything.
Yeah. Yeah, they share qualities, and yet they approach life in wildly different ways, and yet they feel like they have a similar deficit in their spirit.
Right.
That motivates them. So, like, these are things that I think are, like, obvious observations, but another observation that, like, really dramatically changes what you can do about him as an actor is he's really short. He's super short, right? And that is a thing that either has to be eliminated by the director or heightened, to use the pun, by the director. And Emerald Fennell loves to point out how short he is in this film. She uses it to dramatic effect all the time. The first thing she does with it, and it's really important, is that she will use his height to show us how impotent he is, particularly at the top of the film, right? Like, right. I don't know what his actual height is. I'm going to guess it's like 5'5" or something. You could Google that if you want. I don't know how tall he is. But it is an intentional move to have literally every single other person in this movie towering over him in every scene, right? Think about every Tom Cruise scene in any movie, right? Tom Cruise is also famously short. And there are so many times where the director has found ways to mitigate that by him being on an apple box, or by the characters are sitting when they do this, or by he's closer to camera so he looks bigger, right? Just stuff that like makes you not think about Tom Cruise's height, right? So then when a director refuses to do any of that, what they're doing is reinforcing your stereotypes about short people, which is that they are weaker. Right? That's the first thing. But there's another thing that it does, which is it gives us the opportunity from a camera point of view to look down at him. So camera often looks down at him the way you might to a child.
Yeah,
right?
I think
or
that's
like a baby.
Key.
Yes.
It's because when you look up at the same thing happens, that's where we get glory shots where it's like
power shots.
The hero is, in his element or something like that. Like looking up at someone, that's power, because that's how we imagine our parents. That's right. As simple as that relationship.
It's very lizard brain, because it's one of the first power relationships you encounter is, your relationship to your parents. They tower over you, you look up at them, right? And so conversely, when you look down at someone, it evokes the same emotional reaction that you have to children, which is pitying or caring for or thinking of them as cute, definitely de-emphasizing the power relationship, right?
Yeah.
And so doing that is actually a way to make us care about him and get into his point of view, because it removes the threat, right?
Yeah,
it reduces
installs
his
kind
threat.
of sympathy for all these assholes surrounding him.
Yes, because he's constantly overmatched, we take his side, right? Like it's just simple lizard brain math, and that's the director using the actor's height to her advantage, right? Mm-hmm. Now, another observation, and it may seem really simple, but it's actually somewhat complex in this film, is the best way to create intimacy with any character is to be close to them, right? And that goes back to, like, if you thought about what is the actual spatial relationship between you and another person who is your lover or family member, it would be something like a medium close-up to a close-up, right? Mm-hmm. Like if you were shooting that relationship with a camera, that's what it would be, which is why you use those shots to create intimacy between characters in a scene, because it's imitating the emotional impact of a lover, right?
Right. Yeah. So how many times do we get scenes where Felix and who he's in love with, Felix and Oliver are like, it's basically a 2-shot close-up, know?
Mm-hmm. We're gonna talk about that. You're right on that. So, like, most creep movies, you don't give close-ups to the creep because that makes us intimate with them, right? Now, there are movies where what they do is they intentionally get you close in a way that's unnerving, like, say, Silence of the Lambs, right? Like the most famous scene in Silence of the Lambs, when Hannibal Lecter is talking to Clarice about, why are you, what happened in the ranch, Clarice, right? That whole scene.
Right.
The best thing about it is how close we get to Hannibal Lecter in it. Like, you probably all remember the shot where it's like, oh my God, he's staring into my soul. Right? That's an example of using intimacy to create discomfort. This movie isn't really doing that. This movie is generally getting as close as we can get to Oliver, particularly early in the film, because it makes us feel how he feels about Felix. Right? It has the impact of, we want for him what he wants for Felix. Right?
Yeah.
And that's unusual for a creep. Another cool thing is sometimes we'll only get pieces of Oliver. Like, we don't even get the full face, right? Like, he won't even be shot in like a straight up close up or a medium close. It'll be like an extreme close where we don't see all of his chin, right? Or we don't see, like, we'll see like a slice of his nose or something, right? And they do it especially when Felix is around. We don't get the full face because it simulates the experience of looking at somebody in bed. Right? Like, if you're
an intimate Gasparno kind of style.
Right. Yeah. I don't know that Gasparno is my favorite, but you're right.
Yeah. I mean, he does that, doesn't he?
He does that. Boy, does he. We should talk about him sometime on this podcast. Not today, but my God. Yeah. Like, imagine you're in bed with your lover, take a minute, friends, and do that. And then you sort of turn over in bed and look at your lover. The way they look to you is you see a slice of their face. Because they're laying
all
against...
chin, baby.
Yeah.
That's how I like it. Right. All chin. That's right.
It's eyes buried, chin glistening in the sunlight. Yeah, you get it. Mm-hmm. But that sort of slice of face evokes in a unconscious way that impact. And it's how almost every serious conversation between Felix and Oliver is presented to us, after... particularly like when they start to get close to each other, right? So... that's a really smart way to make us feel their intimacy without agreeing that it's happening, right? Like, Emerald Fennell never really tells us this is definitely happening. They like each other, right? Like, do you think Felix actually cares about Oliver in a romantic way at all?
No. And you get the sense from just their behavior in the shots that you're talking about that Oliver's cloying,
Yes.
Felix is there's an orbiting that's happening. Felix is never making eye contact. He's just like enjoying hanging out with the buds. But like Oliver is like multiple times extremely close, trying to flirt, trying to be so in his face that he's like, don't deny me. And that is, I think, part of the sympathy building, and also, just shows again that power struggle in that way.
100%. I didn't know. I don't know that the movie ever gives us a clear statement on how Oliver feels about Felix, because even at the end when he says I hated him, I don't know that I completely agree with him. You know what I mean?
Yeah, he could be lying because he lies. I mean,
or
that's
he
the whole
might
thing.
not be able to face how he really felt about Felix.
But I think there's a fair enough objective actions that when he's definitely fucked up. He needs help.
Yeah,
but like masturbating on his grave, slurping up.
No, you keep saying masturbating. He doesn't masturbate. He fucks the grave. Abe.
He fucks the grave. That's right. Yeah. So there's a lot of. So it's definitely a sexually, charged kind of relationship for him. There's no doubt.
And to be clear,
opinion.
on the scheme front, humping a grave doesn't advance your plans to take over the estate. There's no.
It does if you can get away with it, man.
Put that right at the midpoint. That's how you get the people to give you their houses.
Yeah.
You're right. I haven't really done enough scheming here, so I'll write that into my
clearly not
plan.
a schemer.
Clearly not.
You haven't humped enough graves, dude.
No grave humping. Yeah.
No, those are rookie numbers. Literally.
Thank you, Abe. Okay, so another interesting aspect of how we shoot Oliver to create intimacy is when we leave him in the frame by himself, right? So this is a simple thing directors do. Yeah. They create relationships between characters by them sharing the frame. It happens a lot in Over the Shoulders, right? Where sort of you emphasize or de-emphasize the relationship between characters by including them or omitting them from the frame. So in this movie, and again, all these rules are she does it sometimes, she doesn't do it all the time, right? So there's it's not like a universal rule, but I noticed that at key moments she would often take away the reverse over the shoulder and have Oliver be alone in the frame, even though the most natural thing would be to match the over the shoulder from the previous frame with Felix or Farley or Venetia or whoever, right? So what I mean by that is if you were doing sort of functional journeyman directing, you would make the shots match because it would eliminate the feeling of them being imbalanced in some way, or creating a kind of confusion or geography bump in some way, or a distance bump in some way. Because, when things match, people are like, that feels good, right? So creating a mismatch risks that possibility of creating a bump, and Emerald is doing it because she's trying to emphasize the feeling of unbalancedness that comes from Oliver's shot not matching, right? Making him feel alone, and then we feel bad for him.
Yeah, and there's a lot of shots where isolation is the whole bit. How many times does he have this kind of gaze,
right,
where he kind of just is looking at Felix interacting with the world, not knowing that Oliver's watching, and it's almost like center punched and dollying in kind of stuff. There's a lot of focus on look at this guy who is doing this creepy thing. Don't watch people like this. You know?
No kidding. So if you want to think of one shot that's that explains this the best or shows this the best, I think it's when Oliver shows up to Saltburn the first time and meets the insane David Lynch-esque butler Duncan for the first time, right? So Duncan opens the door this ridiculous manner, and clearly they're not going to get along. That seems obvious from minute one, right? The shot that we get of Oliver is actually not correct spatially. It's framed weird. So when it jumps back,
he's got too much headroom.
He's got too much headroom, and he's too far away from camera for it to make sense as a cut between the two shots. But it's not so far away that you're that's wrong. It's just far enough away that you're that feels weird, right? Yeah. And you're instantly in his emotional headspace as a reaction to Duncan.
Overwhelmed.
Yeah, overwhelmed, and also feel, I don't feel good, right? Because she gave us an unnatural matching reverse, right? So
I also love just in the there's a, like, just as a bookend, when he leaves Saltburn, I love the touch that the film does where that's on a telephoto lens, where it's almost like mundane, like you're leaving is mundane. There's some pomp and circumstance to your arrival, but like we're just going to show it as if it was a documentary.
Yeah, you're just walking away.
And I love that the help is all supposed to be out there to be like, see you off. But
they do nothing.
Even though we have had no interaction with like the footmen or any of that while he's been there that whole summer, there's like one guy who goes like, bye-bye, motherfucker. Like he waves. Like it's clear that none of
they all hate
the
him.
workers like him.
Yeah.
Nobody
they all likes
him.
Right.
Yeah, and I think that that's wonderful because he's the kind of guy who's been representing for the first third of the movie for us. He's like the working class guy.
That's right.
And
he should be their champion.
He should be like someone that they're like, oh, this guy kind of gets it, and he would, but he doesn't chat him up or do any of the shit that you would do because he's got a different agenda. That's all it comes down to.
Yep. 100%. Now, one of the things that makes Fennell such a great director, and by the way, I do think she's a great director. I like her as a director even better than as a writer. I think she has a lot can visually.
Yeah,
and
this is visually compelling.
This is a visually compelling film, 100%. She can use exactly the same tools that we just discussed to create intimacy against us, right? So she can use them for the exact opposite purpose, and it creates a kind of visual language that again is off-putting, and where it undercuts the certainty that you feel. A thing that directors don't often do. Like a lot of times directors build a system in place and then they sort of build to one specific feeling. She puts a system in place and then uses the system for the exact opposite experience later in the film, which is pretty wild. Right. You don't see a lot of that.
I love that.
So one thing she does that really stood out when I watched this the second time is that as she's doing all this height reinforcement stuff, every time Oliver does something devious, he is taller than the person that he's doing it to.
Yeah, it comes out of nowhere. And
you don't think about it because it's blocking usually, but not always. Like, for instance, the first time he runs into Felix and Felix's tire is flat, which, spoilers, we find out at the end of the movie he did. Oliver did that.
It's ridiculous.
Felix is sitting on the ground with a flat tire, and Oliver rolls up to him, right? And it's one of those like, yeah, of course he's sitting on the ground. It just makes him seem like a chilled out dude. But if he was standing, suddenly he wouldn't be in distress. Right?
But now that we know what we know, it's almost like he's threatening Felix.
Exactly. That's exactly what's happening, right? So another great example, when Oliver blackmails Farley and then starts, sort of kicks their Cold War into actual conflict, he literally straddles him and like jerks him off while he threatens him. A thing that if I was to guess who would win that fight before that scene, I would have said, oh, Farley, right?
He's like taller and
seems bigger, but Oliver clearly asserts himself as the more dominant character there, and it's like, wow, that was pretty interesting. And my favorite example, and this is when it really started to stand out to me what she was doing, is when so there's like 3 or 4 pretty famous scenes from this. One of them is that the sister of Felix, her name is Venetia, she has her own sort of emotional problems. One of them is that she's sexually promiscuous, and she's clearly sort of hanging out in the courtyard to be seduced.
Interesting. I didn't interpret it that. I thought that she was sexually stilted.
I thought that Rosamund Pike literally said she was promiscuous, which like she literally planted that idea. I thought she was
saying that she's like blocked. Like she's like all she needs is like one person.
Oh, maybe I misunderstood. Okay.
But I could be misunderstanding too.
Okay,
because I thought that pinged as weird to me because I was like, that's a strange problem to have, but like, I don't know.
I thought she was saying that she like had emotional problems and was therefore...
Either way.
Yeah, anyway. So it's planted by the mom, that there's gonna be some sexing between these two, right?
Right.
So the way that Oliver does it, and it's kind of the first time you see his his actual dark side, is... we're on kind of like a medium close of her in the chair, and he comes in above her, almost like a raptor in the Jurassic Park scene.
Right. Again, we get the orbit.
Yes,
like
he orbits her.
She is powerless to he controls the space.
Yes. So he literally towers over her, straddles her, right? And then later, when he talks her into committing suicide, same angles.
Same angles.
He's above her again, almost similar shot size, right? So like that's their actual dynamic.
He kills these scenes.
These
are the best. The 4 scenes you just pointed out, those are the 4 best scenes in the movie.
100%.
In my opinion.
Yeah.
Because Oliver's acting differently and it totally fits. You're like, I believe this. And it's also, you're like, oh my, like he is powerful. Like you can see how these people who usually are domineering and run every conversation would be taken aback by Oliver's suggestions and words and demands, to the point that you're just like, if anyone were to say this shit to me in real life, I would be like, yeah, keep going.
Yeah.
This is fascinating.
Yeah, I'm loving it. Yeah. Absolutely. The next thing that she does is she starts to give us the size we don't want of some of these intimate moments to make us uncomfortable with him. Like that starts around the midpoint of the movie. We start getting the size we don't want, right? So the first big one is when he drinks Felix's bathwater. We're like really tight on him doing that by the drain, and it's like, bro, no, I don't want to watch this. And it goes on.
And he just jerked off in that bathwater too.
Yeah, and it just goes on.
Not Oliver. He just found Felix masturbating, and he's like, I'm going to drink that bathwater.
I'm going to drink that bathwater. And it goes on a bit. Then after he eats out Venetia when she's on her period, he calls it vampiring. So
I love that line. He's like, good thing because I'm a vampire.
I'm a vampire.
And when she's like, I'm on my period, so don't do this.
Yeah.
And he's like, no, and she's like, okay.
So the shot we get is, again, it's in the water and it's an extreme close-up of his mouth.
All
with
chin,
blood
baby.
blood in his mouth. It's the kind of shot that has been up to this point in cinema history, for like the Lolita type character, like that's who you get that shot of.
Right. Yeah.
And we just got it for him for a pretty heinous act. Right. And it's
I mean, he's bleeding. Like he looks like a vampire.
Yes, he
does.
Like
the blood is trickling into the water. It's pretty dense, and he smiles,
and it's
you're
real tight on it.
I love that.
Me too. Conversely, she also gives us wides that we don't want. Right. So there's
to make him kind of pathetic,
or to make us have to live with the entirety of what's going on.
Yeah.
Right. So like the best one, and we all know what it is. It's the humping the grave. Right.
Have you seen MacGruber?
No, I know it's a huge.
There's one. So MacGruber, by the way, underrated.
Yes, it's good.
Underrated comedy. It's unhinged, and there's a few jokes that are great. And one of the jokes is he is constantly humping stuff, and he usually yells at one point, "I'm gonna shoot," which is just hilarious. But the humping the grave in Saltburn is feels in terms of energy.
Yeah.
MacGruber humping Maya Rudolph's grave.
Okay, thank you.
Good. It's just this wide shot where where he's going like, hey, hey. And Will Forte's just killing it, and just like Will Forte.
Well, all you've done is made another thing for me to do today, which is see that. The humping, so
also kills it.
In the hands of most directors, this is how that scene would go. You'd get the wide of him laying down on the grave. You'd see him starting to slide down the pants, and you would cut in to
and maybe show some clarity,
a medium close, so you get the emotion of what he's doing. Right?
This little freak is going to do some crazy shit.
You don't even need to see it, but she understands that. But if you don't see it, you're not as repulsed by it. You feel bad for him, even though he's psychotic. The only way to be properly repulsed is to watch him do it, right? And that's fucking true. I would say maybe you and I don't agree about this next example. I would say the wide of him dancing is a thing that we love it, but also we don't want it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, of course we don't want it because it means he succeeds and he can enjoy, he's scot-free, he did the thing, and there's going to be no poetic justice for him.
Right, and the exuberance of it, and in some sense the exploitation of it is like a way of taking away the joy of it. You know what I mean? She kind of takes the fun away.
Right. I think it's a necessary maneuver, honestly.
Me too.
if you were to go with full success. You know,
Me
Talented
too.
Mr. Ripley has this bittersweet ending,
right?
Where I believe his name is Peter, the lover at the end, after all the Ripley shit and the Gwyneth Paltrow shit has like kind of resolved, and he's kind of gotten away and out of it. There's one loose end, but he's also in love with this other guy. He meets someone on a boat who knows about his other life. Like they have two people on the boat have two different names and understandings of who he is. So he knows because he's just like control freak, and that's how he's been highly successful at murdering and taking people's identities. I have to kill one of these two people, and the woman has her family with her. I can't pull that off. So I have to kill my own lover, something he doesn't want to do.
Yeah.
But
he pays
we get
the
the
price
feeling that
emotionally.
he does it and it succeeds,
right.
you know, like,
but at
if
what
I'm
cost to his
remembering
soul?
the ending of that movie correctly. And so there's this bittersweet kind of thing. In Saltburn, there's no bittersweetness. It's just straight
it just
up.
happened.
He bides his time. It's not like he gets like slapped, you know, but it's basically, you know, slapping on his wrists, you know, like he doesn't get any, he ruins relationships and he doesn't get what he wants truly, but in a way he kind of is like, I think he settles for it and he's like, yeah, this is good enough.
I'm going to argue, I mean, well, actually, so you know what, let's come back to this at the end of the podcast, because like, I think it's worth discussing whether or not, did he get what he wants? Is this a happy or a sad ending?
Right.
You know what I mean? Because I think you could make a case for either one of them.
Of course.
In either case, showing him dancing nude through this place he stole is uncomfortable and is a successful way of undermining our expectations. We've talked about how she creates weird distance between him and other characters in the way she gives reverse shots. We've talked about that. That's sort of an example of using shot size against us. So here's some things she does that are just like, and I'm going to underline how creepy he is, right? This is the most obvious one, I think, but also the one that a casual film watcher will never think about. And also it takes really a lot of skill as a director to do effectively, which is Oliver is almost never lit. Almost never fully lit. He is constantly in low key or half key or barely lit scenarios. Even in scenes where the person that is in the scene across from him has way more light on them, and she has to justify that with like, you know, the tapestries on the wall or like the drapes or whatever it is, right? There are times where we don't even get eye light for Oliver.
Yeah.
Right?
Which usually people argue if you don't have it, something that cinematographers say is that you feel like that person doesn't have a soul.
Yes.
Eye light is not something that always happens in real life, but almost always happens in media.
Yes, it's hard to... A lot of directors will do this for a moment in a movie or a scene in a movie and then really give you the shot that shows us that so we feel it. She's doing it as a sort of consistent approach to this character so that no single moment of him being not lit stands out as a choice, but it's all a choice. That sort of undermines his, likability.
And there's ways to do that. Like I've seen films, we've all seen films, where it's like the person is not lit, but they have a strong highlight. And that almost says to us, like, that looks like a predator, like a leopard in the jungle looking at me and I'm going to eat my face. So like there's ways in which you can show it. Did she want to focus on the prey aspect of him? No. She wanted to focus on the emptiness of him.
Right, exactly. So, like, even shots where he does have direct sunlight on him, like, for instance, we find out that one of the interview shots we've been going back and forth between, because, there's kind of a monologue that occasionally ties sequences together. We find out it's actually at the bedside of Rosamund Pike, who's the mom of this family.
He's bragging to her.
He's bragging to her as he's slowly letting her die. That shot, there's a huge sun source in it, right? He's right by a window.
Yeah,
which gives
flare everywhere. Yeah,
it gives him this insane edge light, and yet the light never crosses over into his face. His face is still almost entirely unlit, right? Which is like, takes effort. Takes effort.
Yeah, it's very low con. That's something you see a lot on Instagram. It's almost like a lot of those filters are designed to create this kind of lighting.
Right.
Which, they do really well because it, like, not only is it thematically involved, but it looks good. It looks like he's kind of too bright to see, but also obscured in darkness. That's hard.
It's
That's
hard
really
to do that.
Fucking hard.
It takes time and energy and planning to do that. And more specifically, she actually puts lights into scenes as a source of meaning regularly, right? So, like, for instance, the first scene where we're meeting the people at Oxford, they're sitting at kind of a Hogwarts-style table, right? A series of tables. And in the center of all these tables are lights, right? There's a bunch of lights. So, like, literally all the rest of the kids who fit into this world are lit in the face. Meanwhile, Oliver can't find a place to sit. He's shrouded in darkness, right? It's a very simple thing, and it happens over and over and over in this movie. Even places where the light should be hitting his face based on what's in the scene, it doesn't, right? Now, she does one thing that's like sort of a tangent off of that style, which is sometimes she'll give these big flashes of color that fully light up his face. And they're usually single saturated colors that feel like nightmarish or fantasy-ish, like red or green or something like that, right?
Right, yeah.
And you'll see him in these party montages. And for a little while I was like, okay, so that's like sort of, maybe his latent desire. And then she does this really cool thing where she ties it together with the glass panes surrounding Saltburn and the bathrooms. So you start to realize,
and also, when Felix dies, that's,
yes. She's actually doing she's using an archetypal motif there where she's using stained glass windows and crossing it with partying and sort of making a sacred...
Which is excellent.
It's awesome. It's a sacred, profane inversion.
Right, so because they're like neon colors.
Right. Right, so like a lot of movies do that, right? But they'll do it in this way that's very like Romeo plus Juliet, where it's like, you get it, it's like stained glass, but it's rad. You know what I mean?
Right. Whereas this is just like, and this is the world, and the world looks like this. And if you want to notice the similarity of these shots, that's on you, baby.
Right. What she's doing is secretly reinforcing the sanctity / holiness. We use that word in quotes, of the world Oliver wants to belong to. Saltburn and the wealthy class that want to be in this place are sacred. They are, they have transcended the way that, a religious character would in a stained glass window. And so every time Oliver is almost bonding with Felix or enjoying the sort of rapturous, let's call it communion with the people from this place, we get flashes of that color, right? And so it's cool. It works because all of us have a built-in emotional understanding of what stained glass windows means, and what they mean, and so she's using that in a very primal way to like underscore the meaning of Oliver's actions, right? Then she goes even further and makes the blood that he on his face. And some of the the blood that Venetia dies in, right, in the bathtub, she makes those the same color. Like they're this like bright saturated red, right? It's pretty gnarly, and really cool work. Okay, so like I think this is the last major tactic we haven't totally talked about. So the last way she makes Oliver into a creep is pretty simple framing. And by what I mean by that is like, look at his frames. Okay, most movies, they teach you this in film school. They have a thing called the rule of thirds, right? The rule of thirds means people feel comfortable when you put the thing that your eye is supposed to look at on one of the third lines dividing the frame, right? If you think of the frame, I would
argue it's less rule of thirds and more of balanced frames.
Yeah,
because you can have rule of fours and rule of fives.
100%. Rule of thirds is just a simple, also kind of archaic way of talking about a balanced frame, right? Oliver almost never has a balanced frame, right?
Yeah.
Lots of times they'll frame him in such a way that he has massive headroom, which again reinforces he's short and also makes him feel like he is less than a person who gets a normal frame.
Right. He's always placed in strange quadrants that are off-putting or aesthetically.
Yes, it dehumanizes him. Also, in almost every conversation that he's having with somebody, he is short-framed. And what short framing means is, in most conversation pieces in movies, characters, when you're shooting the shot of them looking at the other character they're talking to, they will look at the side of frame that has the most space. They'll look across that space to the other character, and then you cut to the reverse, and that character will look across at the other character in the area in the frame that has the most space. Short framing means they're looking at the shorter side of frame where there's less space, and it gives us a general feeling of discomfort. Again, these rules were followed more religiously in the past than they are in 2024.
I mean, it's like the handbook for French New Wave cinema.
Yes.
You know, like Godard, like Pierre Le Fou, or like Breathless. Literally, the things you just said are like the visual strategy of those films. Because I think they were wanting to do, like, I want to break convention. He is not in a world that makes sense to the rest of us. And that's exactly what this film is doing with, Barry Keoghan.
Right. And you'll see a lot of films use this tactic. So, like, I don't think you could just, like, see he's short frame. That means he's a creep. It's just one of those things where the summary of all these parts gives you a distinct feeling.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's an aggregate. I don't think any one single thing would feel enough, but all of them together, it's a pretty effective strategy. And the last thing that she does is she has him hump a grave.
That's true.
She has him hump a grave.
Pretty sweet. That's pretty sweet.
That really made
There's
the film
one thing
frame.
I want to add to your theory, which is, because I love your explanation of how to build a Ripley from the perspective of everything is character-centered.
Yes.
Also, I would argue that a lot of effort goes into, and with high dividends, kind of moving the goalpost of what is... Like, what is a piece of shit? What is not necessarily a creep,
that's interesting.
But like, because a lot of what you were talking about, especially earlier, was about sympathy building in the in Act 1 for Oliver. We show the rich society as vapid and annoying and judgmental
and selfish,
and people who deserve to be taken down a peg. But of course, like, not that many pegs, So it's just like the world building and the sympathy for the devil. It's almost like you hide the devil a little bit, and you show how everyone around them is more of a devil. That's how you build a Ripley, in my opinion. It's also
that's an interesting observation.
Space around it,
because I think this movie exists in a time where there's so much animosity toward wealthy people that it can't be, you couldn't make Talented Mr. Ripley and have it be as effective. Right?
It's interesting because this stuff is straight out of the playbook, at least like what I was just mentioning.
Yeah, it is.
Succession, Arrested Development, which both did like black comedy and satire. This is a little bit black comedy, but it's more of like a thriller or like kind of a psychological horror, which plays it straight. But they're all doing the same thing with their rich characters.
Right. They strip them of all humanity eventually and make them into pure monsters.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying... I don't know. I don't know how I feel about that, because I agree with the gripes. I agree with our cultural gripes. So maybe they are this. I don't know.
I'm more of just examining it from a standpoint of, like, you move the goalposts if you set the goalposts of, like, who's sympathetic... Surrounding them with unsympathetic characters is a good way to build sympathy for that one character. You know what I mean?
Yes, you're right. So it is effective as a tactic, which is all we're really talking about here. And yet I think part of the reason why people love Saltburn is that it is tapping into a certain sort of, like, it's a revenge film in a way.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
Ready or Not does the same thing. That's just a straight horror that plays...
Promising Young
Kill
Woman.
all the rich. Eat the rich. You know?
Promising Young Women is also a revenge film.
Yep.
I don't think this movie is trying to be a revenge film in the same way that Promising Young Woman is, but, like, it may by default be doing that. I don't know. It's a discussion point.
He's the Joker, baby.
He's the Joker, baby. So, all I want to say in conclusion is that I really think that Emerald Fennell is somebody to watch. Like, I think she's a great director. I love her films, visually in particular. I think she makes great visual choices. From what I've read of her interviews, she starts with visual ideas. And I think
a good, smart choice.
Yeah, that's interesting. And, like, also just want to thank her for bringing back all the great dance rock that existed before Vampire Weekend.
Cold War Kids is
Cold
there.
War Kids, baby. You know, Killers, as I said. Somebody gifted me 2004's Hot Fuzz before that album broke out, Abe. I literally, for like 2 months, I was listening to it. I was like, man, this is a good band. I hope people hear about them. And baby, they did.
Up.
Baby, they did.
Hell yeah.
I also think creep movies are one of those like markers that all of our auteurs tend to sort of visit at some point or the other. You know?
A little bit.
Yeah.
Especially the edgy guys.
Well, but even like even our twee filmmakers like Wes Anderson have their Rushmores.
True.
You know what I mean?
True. It's about dysfunction, and a lot of great filmmakers want to dabble in the dysfunction of a character who is seeing the world in a different way. That makes their films unique. You know, you have a strong perspective that is outside the norm. That's a great lesson alone, you know, in terms of if you're crafting a story. If you have that in your story, like that's compelling to almost everyone.
100%. And last, I just want to say R.I.P. to Anthony Minghella, who was
the director of Talented
Miss Ripley, who died young from cancer.
What else did he do?
He did English Patient and Cold
English
Mountain.
Patient, and Cold Mountain.
He's a good director. He was a good director, and
hell yeah,
he was a subtle director in a lot of ways, and it's just one of those things. Like, man, he really had an interesting point of view that was nuanced. And you don't see that a lot in auteur type filmmakers.
I like this story a lot because it makes a villain out of everyone, but it also gives you this feeling of like the cycle of abuse can be broken. It didn't have to be this way. Like there's a bittersweetness to this story.
Well, it's funny. You could kind of conceive of it as Game of Thrones too.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. Like
it's the same kind of idea.
Well, I mean, effectively medieval history you could see as this, right? Like this fits in a continuum of people
killing
usurping
kings, and,
usurping and taking over, and making what was theirs into mine.
Right.
You know, like that's
just William Wallace, baby. I guess William Wallace isn't a good example because he died. William Wallace famously got
He
killed.
did famously die. You know, unlike his contemporaries who were still alive, none of them died. But
so enter your own example of someone who didn't die, who never died.
Listen, audience, you know the point that I'm thinking of.
You know the point I'm
make
trying
it yourself.
to make, man. What am I, a podcaster? Am I supposed to spell out everything for you fucking freaks?
Anyway, that's all I got for you, Abe. I did it all.
Dude, that lovely film.
Yeah.
Lovely, like basically schematic. You just gave us a visual schematic of like, you know, I feel like Emerald Fennell is like listening to this and being like, you can't give away all my tricks.
You gave away all my tricks. She's definitely not doing that because she's like, you have not seen anything yet. And, you know, pulls out a fucking tapestry of cruelty that we're all going to enjoy right? Because she's kind of a mean filmmaker. And I love that. Right.
I love the meanness.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what she's into. Also, David Fincher, kind of a mean filmmaker.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
They seem like kindred spirits.
Wants to
in a way.
see your characters punished.
Yeah.
That's a key,
yeah.
I think. And you will go really far to punish any and everybody, really.
Suffering is a key to great filmmaking.
Hey, man.
That's right.
I don't disagree.
No.
I'll be honest.
Neither does history.
I guess that's how it rolls. I guess that's the end of the episode.
I think we're already done. I think you've already cut all this.